Do you remember those lost American Christmas foods and drinks that once filled homes with warmth? Each dish carried the scent of family, tradition, and slow joy. When did we stop tasting Christmas the way it used to feel? Mincemeat pie with suet was the heart of Christmas for generations, the kind of dessert that smelled like comfort and memory. The filling was thick and dark, heavy with beef fat, raisins, apples, and cloves, all cooked slow until the sweetness turned deep and spiced. Every slice was a reminder that celebration meant richness, even when the world outside was cold and gray. It was a pie that took time, patience, and a steady hand. There was nothing quick about it. The suet made it soft but strong, holding together the fruits like a secret too good to share. Grandmothers passed down the recipe like a family treasure, handwritten and stained with years of use. When margarine and vegetable shortening took over, the old way began to fade, called outdated and too heavy. But those who remember it swear no modern dessert has ever come close to that aroma from the oven on Christmas Eve. Ambrosia salad with whipped Dream Whip was the glowing bowl of color every 1960s table needed. There was something innocent and festive about it. Tiny marshmallows, canned fruit, coconut flakes, and that sweet whipped topping folded until it looked like snow. Housewives adored it because it was easy, cheerful, and foolproof, the perfect match for the glimmer of tinsel and the flicker of colored lights. It looked fancy enough for guests, but cost next to nothing to make. Kids would sneak spoonfuls when no one was looking, drawn by that sugar cloud smell. You could always find it chilling beside a glass dish of cranberry sauce, a sign that the feast had begun. Dream Whip made it smooth and glossy, almost too pretty to eat, a vision of mid-century optimism. Now it sits in the forgotten pages of community cookbooks, too sweet and too sincere for today's tables, a ghost of holiday magic that once shimmered bright. Tom and Jerry Holiday Punch wasn't a cartoon. It was the drink that made Christmas evenings glow. Made from beaten eggs, sugar, brandy, and rum, it was warm, foamy, and rich enough to chase the chill from any snowstorm. Families would gather around the punch bowl as steam rose from the mugs, the scent of nutmeg hanging in the air. It wasn't a fancy cocktail, it was home comfort in liquid form. Every sip carried the cheer of togetherness and the kind of laughter that only came once a year. It took patience to make, stirring the eggs until they turned to silk, whisking the heat just right. One wrong move and it would curdle, so you had to care about it, like most things that truly mattered. As instant mixes and bottled drinks replaced homemade warmth, the Tom and Jerry slipped into memory. But for those who tasted it, the holidays have never felt quite as alive again. Glazed country ham with cloves and pineapple rings was the king of mid-century Christmas dinners. It arrived at the table shining like gold, sweet glaze bubbling at the edges, the scent of sugar and smoke filling every corner of the house. Mothers would press whole cloves into the scored surface before covering it with pineapple rings that baked until caramelized. It was simple, showy, and proud, the kind of meal that said you'd made it through another year with something worth sharing. Families would carve it slowly, slices steaming, as laughter and conversation filled the air. The sticky crust and salty meat made the perfect contrast, a blend of celebration and hard-earned comfort. It was a meal you could count on, sturdy and satisfying. When turkey took the spotlight, this beautiful relic faded away, tucked behind modern menus and calorie counts. But in the glow of memory, the ham still glistens, waiting to be remembered. Ribbon gelatin molds were a Christmas miracle of patience and precision. Layer after layer, red, green, white. Each one had to set before the next could be poured. Housewives guarded their molds like prized possessions, careful not to rush or ruin the design. The result was a shimmering masterpiece that looked like stained glass under the dining room light. Kids stared at it in wonder, while adults admired the effort it took to pull off something so delicate. Served in perfect slices, it was a symbol of pride and skill as much as taste. Sweet, tangy, and light, it was a small victory in a decade obsessed with beauty and order. When boxed gelatin lost its charm, so did these edible ornaments. Today, no one has the time or patience to make a dessert that waits for you. but those bright, wobbly layers once defined holiday joy. Boiled custard was the southern cousin to eggnog, smoother, thicker, and somehow more intimate. It wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual. Grandmothers stood over the stove, stirring the milk, sugar, and egg yolks until they turned into velvet. The smell alone could stop conversation. The soft heat of vanilla and nutmeg filled every room. Served cold in punch glasses, it was rich but calming, a quiet comfort between church and supper. No alcohol, no noise, just sweetness and warmth shared between generations. Children loved it, adults cherished it, and it always meant Christmas was truly here. When cartons of store-bought eggnog appeared, the boiled custard faded quietly away. Yet those who remember it know no bottle can ever hold that kind of love. Oyster dressing was Christmas on the coast, where the ocean met the table. It was made with bread cubes, celery, onions, and oysters stirred in at the very end, so the flavor stayed gentle and briny. For many families, it wasn't Christmas dinner without it. The scent of butter, sea, and sage filled the house long before the guests arrived. It was a dish that carried generations, fishermen, grandmothers, Sunday cooks, all leaving their mark with one small change to the recipe. It wasn't fancy, but it was rich in its own right, proof that you didn't need wealth to have something special. As seafood prices rose and tastes changed, the old coastal dressing disappeared from most menus. But for those who grew up with it, no stuffing since has ever felt quite right. Cranberry orange congealed salad was a jewel-toned treasure from refrigerator cookery's golden age. The tang of cranberries met the sweetness of oranges and the creaminess of whipped cheese, all bound together in gelatin's glossy grip. Housewives took pride in how it gleamed under dining room lights, slicing it clean to show off the layers. It was sweet enough for dessert, but still called a salad, a clever way to balance indulgence and thrift. Nuts added crunch, oranges gave brightness, and cranberries tied it all back to the season. It was cool, festive, and unmistakably mid-century. Then came the downfall of molded foods and the age of fresh, and this dish faded like tinsel after New Year's Day. Still, for those who grew up with it, no modern salad captures that same sparkle of home and holiday. Sugar-cured country ham biscuits were the kind of holiday snack that tasted like welcome itself. The rolls were soft and warm, baked golden and split open to hold thin slices of sweet, smoky ham. Brown sugar or honey glaze gave the meat its signature shine and flavor, and a touch of mustard added bite. They were passed around at church socials, candlelight suppers, and long nights of storytelling by the fire. Small enough for children's hands, hearty enough for working men, they turned gatherings into something more than meals. The smell alone could draw people from the next room. But as fast food and catering replaced homemade trays, those tender biscuits slipped out of Christmas tradition. Their taste lingers only in memory now, wrapped in wax paper and love. Molasses taffy pulls were pure holiday fun before screens and schedules replaced togetherness. Families would gather in warm kitchens, rolling up their sleeves to stretch ropes of dark, sticky candy until it turned pale and glossy. The air was filled with laughter, steam, and the faint scent of burnt sugar. Children's hands got sticky, adults shared stories, and the night went by without anyone checking a clock. Once cooled and cut, the candy was wrapped in paper, a small, sweet prize for effort and patience. It wasn't just about the candy, it was about making something together. Those evenings built memories that lasted longer than any dessert. Today, few people even know how to make molasses taffy, but its legacy remains a symbol of the simple joy of doing things by hand. Popcorn balls wrapped in wax paper were the kind of homemade gift that came straight from the heart. The popcorn was popped over the stove, the syrup boiled just enough to turn golden and sticky, and the whole kitchen filled with the smell of caramel and butter. Once the syrup hit the popcorn, there was no going back. Hands were greased, laughter filled the room, and everyone rolled them into perfect little globes of sweetness. They cooled on pans before being wrapped carefully in wax paper, tied with ribbon, and slipped into baskets for neighbors and friends. It was candy you could hold, made from the simplest of ingredients and given with genuine warmth. Before store-bought chocolates and tins of cookies took over, popcorn balls were how families said, "We thought of you." You could eat them on the walk home from caroling or hang them on the tree for decoration. They were crunchy, cheerful, and proudly imperfect, the kind of treat that disappeared as quickly as it cooled. Fruitcake icebox cookies were what happened when patience met practicality in a holiday kitchen. Bakers would mix shortbread dough with chopped candied fruit and nuts, roll it into logs, and tuck it away in tins to age. Over days, the flavors deepened, mellowed, and turned into something quietly spectacular. Each slice, speckled with reds and greens, looked like a stained glass window lit from within. Unlike fruitcakes, these cookies didn't demand months of soaking or layers of wrapping. They were simple, beautiful, and perfectly timed for Christmas week. Families loved them because they lasted long after the tree came down, a small comfort in the quiet days after the holiday rush. Today, most people don't wait for flavor to develop. They want sweetness right away. But these cookies remind us that some things taste better when time is allowed to do its work. The Wassail bowl was once the heartbeat of Christmas gatherings, a steaming punch that filled homes with warmth and cheer. Made from cider, ale, and brandy, spiced with cinnamon and cloves, it was ladled into mugs as voices rose in song. Wassailing wasn't just drinking, it was community. Neighbors went door to door, sharing music, toasts, and blessings for good fortune. The bowl would pass from hand to hand, its surface fogged from the heat, carrying the glow of fellowship through every sip. The taste was rich and tart, full of apple, spice, and something that felt like belonging. It wasn't about getting drunk, it was about being together in a cold, uncertain world. As modern celebrations grew quieter and more private, the Wassail bowl was set aside. But its spirit still lingers in every shared toast at Christmas, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it back. Coca-Cola glazed roast duck was the sweet showstopper of mid-century Southern Christmas tables. Housewives clipped the recipe from glossy magazines and bragged about the glossy glaze that only cola could make. The sugar caramelized as it baked, coating the skin in a syrupy shell that crackled under the knife. Every slice glistened, tender meat beneath a sticky, spiced crust that tasted like something halfway between candy and luxury. It was playful, a little daring, and perfectly suited to an era that loved spectacle as much as flavor. Guests would lean in, curious and delighted, asking how such a strange idea worked so well. But as tastes turned toward lighter fare and simpler roasting, the Coca-Cola duck vanished from holiday menus. Still, the thought of it, bold, unapologetic, and shining red-brown from the oven, feels like a reminder of a time when Christmas dared to be indulgent. Jewel salad was a centerpiece disguised as a side dish, a shimmering blend of color and cream from the heart of mid-century America. Cubes of red, green, and orange gelatin floated in a base of whipped cream or mayonnaise, suspended like ornaments in snow. Housewives prepared it days ahead, setting it carefully in glass molds and unveiling it with ceremony on Christmas Day. Each slice caught the light, a kaleidoscope of color that drew admiring gasps before the first bite. It was playful, proud, and precise, the embodiment of 1950s domestic artistry. No one worried about whether it was too sweet or too strange. It was the effort that counted, the beauty that said, "I care." Over time, gelatin lost its magic, and this edible stained glass disappeared into nostalgia. Yet, for those who remember, it still glows brightly in memory, reflecting an age of optimism and invention. Eggnog ice cream loaf was the frozen echo of Christmas mornings when the house smelled of spice, laughter, and pine. It began with homemade eggnog, rich cream, nutmeg, sugar, and a hint of rum, transformed into something smooth, cold, and festive. The mixture was poured into decorative molds, frozen overnight, and sliced like cake, each piece pale gold with ribbons of whipped cream or bits of candied fruit. Served on chilled plates, it melted slowly into a creamy sweetness that felt both nostalgic and new. Families adored its novelty. It turned a familiar drink into something you could serve with ceremony. In the glow of holiday lights, each bite felt like luxury on a modest budget, a miracle that only a freezer could make. For children, it was pure magic, the promise of snow in dessert form. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a celebration of patience and imagination. But as pre-made desserts crowded store shelves and convenience took center stage, the eggnog loaf quietly faded from memory. Still, its memory lingers in whispers of vanilla and spice, a dessert that once turned winter cold into something warm enough to remember forever. Candied citron pound cake was the kind of Christmas gift that carried love farther than words could reach. Dense, golden, and fragrant with sugar and citrus peel, it was baked in advance, wrapped in wax paper, and sent across towns or oceans. Each loaf was a message. I remember you, even from here. Families baked it for soldiers, friends, and neighbors, its buttery scent filling the kitchen with both hope and longing. The cake itself was firm and sweet, studded with jewels of candied citron that gleamed when sliced. It aged beautifully, its flavor deepening day by day, a reward for patience and care. The first bite was bright and tender, the kind of taste that reminded people of home. It was both luxury and comfort, proof that generosity could be baked by hand. Over time, artificial extracts and cheap substitutes dulled its glow, and the ritual disappeared into history. But open an old tin or read a grandmother's recipe, and you can almost smell it again. The citrus, the butter, and the devotion that once traveled by mail. Spiced pickled peaches were Southern hospitality in a jar, golden and glowing beneath layers of syrup and spice. Fresh peaches were peeled, simmered gently, then steeped in vinegar, sugar, cloves, and cinnamon until they turned tender and aromatic. Their flavor was a perfect balance of sweet and sharp, warm enough to brighten any heavy winter meal. On Christmas tables, they gleamed beside roasted meats, adding color and perfume to the feast. Every household had its own recipe, a secret ratio of syrup to spice, and every jar looked like bottled sunshine. They were gifts as much as food, tokens of care shared between neighbors or saved for honored guests. The ritual of sealing jars with wax and tucking them away in cool cellars gave the dish its charm. As store-bought sauces replaced homemade preserves, the peaches disappeared quietly from holiday tables. Yet, for those who once tasted them, nothing compares. The way the syrup clings to a fork, the spice hums on the tongue, and the memory feels like kindness preserved. Chestnut and apple stuffing was Christmas comfort at its purest, rich with scent and memory. Roasted chestnuts, peeled and crumbled, were folded into bread cubes with chopped apples, onions, celery, and melted butter. The mixture baked until golden, filling the kitchen with a fragrance both earthy and sweet. Each bite held contrast: soft bread, crisp apple, and chestnuts that gave a gentle nuttiness unmatched by any substitute. Families loved it because it turned humble ingredients into something festive and full of heart. It was the centerpiece of countless 1940s Christmas dinners when warmth and flavor meant more than presentation. But when disease destroyed the great American chestnut trees, the recipe lost its soul. Cooks replaced the chestnuts with pecans or walnuts, but the taste was never quite the same. What remains is nostalgia, tucked into handwritten cookbooks and family stories, a dish bound to both memory and loss. Chestnut stuffing was more than food. It was a connection to nature and tradition, a comfort born from the forest and kept alive at the table. Rum-soaked plum pudding was the grand finale of Christmas dinner, a dessert so dramatic it demanded silence before applause. It was mixed and steamed weeks in advance, stuffed with dried fruit, breadcrumbs, sweet spices, and dark molasses that gave it its heavy sweetness. On Christmas Day, it returned to the table crowned in brandy, lit with a match, and carried in a soft blue flame that shimmered like a blessing. Families gathered close to watch the fire dance across the pudding's glossy surface, the scent of rum and sugar filling the air. The first spoonful was rich, spicy, and faintly smoky from the flame, a taste that lingered like memory itself. It was a dessert of patience, one that required time, heat, and courage to perfect. As quicker sweets appeared and fear of fat and fire crept in, the old plum pudding faded into legend. But for those who remember it, there was nothing quite like that moment. The hush, the flicker of light, and the warmth that came from more than just the brandy. It was food that celebrated endurance and joy, proof that even the darkest winter could glow with sweetness and flame. Snow pudding with custard sauce was winter turned to sweetness, a dessert as delicate as breath on glass. It began with whipped gelatin beaten until it was pale, trembling, and light enough to float, then poured into molds to set. Beneath it waited a pool of warm, golden custard, smooth, soft, and scented with vanilla and cream. Together, they made something elegant yet modest, the kind of dish that turned thrift into art. In the 1930s, this felt modern, scientific even, a dessert built on texture and restraint rather than richness. Housewives admired how it shimmered like snow under lamplight and melted instantly on the tongue. It was the perfect ending to heavy meals, a whisper instead of a finale. Making it took patience and timing, beat too long and the snow collapsed, stir too fast and the custard curdled. But when done right, it was a marvel, soft, golden, and quietly beautiful. Today, it sits forgotten between the pages of old cookbooks, replaced by instant mixes that never quite taste like care. Still, in memory, snow pudding feels eternal, fragile, bright, and gone too soon. Eggnog punch with vanilla ice cream was the taste of Christmas excess, cold, rich, and loud with laughter. It started with homemade eggnog, thick with cream, sugar, and beaten eggs, poured into wide crystal bowls and crowned with scoops of soft vanilla ice cream. The two swirled together into a pale golden froth, bubbling with sweetness and warmth. Nutmeg dusted the top like snowfall, and the scent of spice, milk, and rum filled every corner of the house. Guests leaned in for a cup, smiling as the ice cream melted into silk. It was a drink meant to be shared, indulgent, but sincere, and it turned gatherings into celebrations. Housewives loved it because it was both simple and impressive, the kind of thing that made everyone linger a little longer. When store-bought cartons and paper cups took over, the ritual faded into memory. The silver ladle, the punch bowl, the soft clink of glasses, all became echoes of a slower, sweeter time. But even now, one creamy sip of eggnog brings back that glow, the laughter, the music, and the sense that Christmas was something you could taste. Red Hots, cinnamon apples were Christmas color made edible, a bright scarlet treasure from the golden age of holiday cooking. Peeled apples simmered slowly in syrup made from Red Hots candies, butter, and sugar until their flesh turned tender and glowing. The scent of cinnamon filled the whole house, clinging to curtains and coats, mingling with pine and pie. On the table, they looked like ornaments under lamplight, glistening, fragrant, and a little mysterious. Served warm, they tasted sharp and sweet, a fiery contrast to the savory roasts beside them. They were playful, a little theatrical, and every bite felt like a celebration. Children loved them for their color, adults for their comfort, and together they made the meal feel complete. They were also practical, cheap, easy, and beautiful, a perfect mid-century trifecta. But as the candy aisle replaced the pantry and convenience became king, Red Hot's apples slipped quietly into history. Still, for those who ever tasted one fresh from the pot, its sweetness lingers like memory itself, simple, bright, and impossible to forget. Coffee jelly with whipped cream was elegance born from leftovers, the calling card of a 1950s hostess who could turn the simplest thing into something that looked like magic. Cold coffee was mixed with sugar and gelatin, poured into molds, and chilled until it set with a shine like dark glass. It was cut into tidy cubes and topped with a swirl of whipped cream that melted slowly into the surface. Served in small cocktail glasses, it looked like sophistication in miniature, simple, modern, and quietly daring. Guests marveled at how something made from yesterday's pot of coffee could look so polished and taste so refined. The flavor was smooth, bittersweet, and grown-up, a dessert that whispered instead of shouted. Housewives loved it because it could be made in advance, chilled, and brought out just as the conversation turned toward compliments. It was thrift disguised as glamour, a lesson in making do with grace. Then coffee became something to gulp, not savor, and the jelly slipped away from holiday tables. Yet in every cup of strong, cooled coffee, there lingers the ghost of that shimmering dessert, a reminder that even the most ordinary things can feel extraordinary with a little care and imagination. Homemade divinity candy tested every baker's patience, skill, and faith in the weather. It was made from sugar, corn syrup, egg whites, and the hope that the air outside would stay perfectly dry. If there was even a hint of humidity, the mixture refused to set, collapsing into sticky defeat. On cold, crisp afternoons, though, the magic happened. The mixture turned glossy, white, and light as a cloud. It was dropped by spoonfuls onto wax paper, forming mounds of sweetness that looked like winter snow. Families would crowd the kitchen, taking turns stirring and watching the thermometer like it was a sacred ritual. The sound of spoons scraping bowls, the smell of sugar rising, and the thrill of getting it just right made the whole day feel special. It was a candy that required attention, patience, and luck, a kind of edible miracle. Few people today have the time to wait for weather and sugar to agree, so the recipe sits quietly in old cookbooks. But for those who remember it, divinity was more than a treat. It was proof that perfection could be fragile, fleeting, and worth the wait. Golden Glow salad was the 1970s dream of what good health should look like, a shimmering tower of orange optimism. It mixed orange juice, grated carrots, and crushed pineapple with gelatin, poured into molds that promised sunshine on the plate. Housewives praised its bright color and cheerful sweetness, proud to serve something that looked like both dessert and virtue. It was light, refreshing, and just sweet enough to satisfy without guilt, the kind of dish that seemed to make the whole meal more modern. Under fluorescent kitchen lights, it sparkled like stained glass, a victory for convenience and presentation alike. Kids might wrinkle their noses at the carrots, but mothers adored the ease, a salad that needed no dressing and never wilted. This was the era when canned fruit, gelatin, and instant mixes stood proudly as progress. Each shimmering slice reflected a belief that beauty and health could come straight from a box. When fresh salads took over and gelatin molds went out of style, Golden Glow salad quietly faded into memory. But it remains a perfect snapshot of an age that truly believed brightness could be served cold. Coconut snow cake was the edible image of winter, soft, white, and glistening like a dream of freshly fallen snow. The sponge layers were baked golden, cooled and carefully coated with buttercream before being rolled in fine coconut flakes that shimmered under candlelight. Every slice revealed a contrast of color and texture, warm gold hidden beneath pure white. It tasted rich but delicate, a dessert that brought quiet awe to any Christmas table. Mothers made it for church suppers, family gatherings, and special winter birthdays, carrying it through the cold like treasure. It wasn't quick or simple. It was an act of love disguised as baking. Each layer was brushed with syrup, each crumb patted smooth, every detail perfected by hand. When boxed cake mixes and ready-made frostings took over, the snow cake melted from tradition. Yet the memory remains: soft sweetness, patient work, and the joy of something beautiful enough to stop conversation. Its name still carries the whisper of cold mornings, glowing kitchens, and the timeless promise that beauty once made can live on in memory like the first snow that never melts. Hot buttered rum batter was comfort in a jar, a promise kept through the cold and quiet of long December nights. It was made from butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes a pinch of clove, all creamed together until smooth, golden, and fragrant. A spoonful of this mixture would be dropped into a mug, followed by boiling water and a dash of dark rum that turned the drink into liquid warmth. The first sip felt like standing beside a hearth, sweet, spiced, and steadying to the bones. It was not just a drink, but a ritual, a pause between the bustle of shopping and the hush of midnight. Families kept jars in their refrigerators all season long, ready for guests, stories, and sudden snowfalls. The scent of caramel and spice filled the home, softening the edges of winter's chill. Today, instant cocoa and coffee packets have replaced the slow comfort of hot buttered rum. But in the memory of anyone who ever tasted it, that jar meant more than convenience. It meant care, patience, and the knowledge that the smallest spoonful could warm the longest night. Old-fashioned fig pudding was the heartbeat of a Victorian Christmas, dense, dark, and fragrant with spice. Dried figs were chopped fine and stirred into a batter thickened with breadcrumbs, molasses, and sweet, a mixture that demanded time and devotion. It was steamed for hours, filling every corner of the house with the smell of sugar, fruit, and earth. Families took pride in their own versions, some richer with nuts, others brightened by a splash of rum or citrus peel. The pudding emerged glistening, heavy, and full of promise, to be sliced and served warm with cream or brandy sauce. The flavor was deep and smoky, the texture soft and close, like a sweet kept secret from another century. It was a dessert that required patience and respect, not something for the hurried or half-hearted. When lighter sweets took hold, fig pudding slipped quietly from the Christmas table, but it never vanished from memory. In old recipe books and faded family notes, its name still beats gently, a reminder of a holiday built on waiting, sharing, and faith that the best things come to those who take their time. Peppermint stick pie was winter turned into dessert, a swirl of pink, white, and joy. Crushed peppermint candies were folded into clouds of whipped cream, then poured into a buttery crumb crust and left to freeze until firm and gleaming. Each slice cracked neatly under the knife, cool and creamy with a spark of mint that tingled like snowflakes on the tongue. It was playful and proud, the kind of dessert that made children giggle and adults lean in for just one more bite. The colors alone could lift a gray December day, shining bright under candlelight or holiday bulbs. Served with cocoa or after a long Christmas supper, it captured the simple thrill of something made to delight, not impress. Housewives loved it because it was easy, affordable, and cheerful, a small miracle from an ordinary pantry. As tastes shifted toward quiet sophistication, the candy-colored pie disappeared from the holiday spread. But its memory still hums like carols in the distance, a sweet chill that whispers of a time when joy was bold, sugar was celebration, and dessert looked exactly like happiness. Let me prove that point to you right now by examining a little bit of what reigned supreme during the 1950s, when the chaos from the war had finally ended and things were going towards peacetime again. People immediately jumped ship on things like bisques and au gratin, and now crown roasts with apricot dressings became the trendy thing to do for Christmas. It was seen as the perfect symbol of elegance during the holiday season, and it was definitely tied strongly together with Christmas. The crown roast looked regal. It gave off an air of importance, as in, if this were being served at the table, you knew that there was a pretty serious occasion too. It was dramatic. It had flair, style, and the ability to catch everyone's eyes. And as a result, after 2 to 3 decades spent living heavily frugal lifestyles, it captivated Americans hook, line, and sinker. After the World War, the United States of America not only headed back towards peaceful days, but also entered prosperous ones. It was a time of economic growth, and the disposable income your average household had went up. Now, even under normal circumstances, that inspires people to live a little bit more lavishly, but the American population after the 30s and 40s was definitely starved, and they wanted to go all out with their money. Splurging on pricey cuts of meat? Buying that one silk bed sheet? Getting a new 3-piece suit made? All an effect of the times, as people would spend their money to gain a sense of that same financial stability they used to always have. That went doubly for food, and the crown roast is a near-perfect example. The preparation was tough. You had to make sure the rib bones would stand just upright so that it would resemble a crown. And the apricot dressing, as vibrant as it is, was a tricky dressing to nail, because everything really needed to work in harmony here. Remember how I was saying that Americans were heading towards the sweet and the savory plus gaining a knack for gourmet dining? That entire gradual shift in tastes and preferences culminated in the crown roast. It was like the recipe was a challenge to any eager home cook that was laying their eyes on it for the first time. As they'd read the steps, it almost felt like the roast was inviting you to cook it, asking you if you still had the chops as a chef. It's the same today, too. Everybody wants to hop on TikTok and prove that they can make a really fancy culinary marvel from the comfort of their kitchen, so why would people almost a century ago be too different? Plus, crown roasts were the perfect party item, especially in the suburbs. It was something to talk about, gawk at, and discuss, which really made it ideal for large Christmas festivities and celebrations. The thing is, though, Americans love extravagance, but the only thing they love more is convenience. And as time settled, Americans would slowly go all in on that aspect. Crown roasts took a lot of work to make, and it also meant that you had to know your way around a chicken as far as butchering was concerned, which became a skill that was fast fading thanks to canned stuff. Plus, tastes also went more towards foreign cuisines and cultures, like French and Scandinavian cooking. Then, there was also the fact that crown roasts used expensive cuts, and the cost of meat was only rising towards the tail end of the 50s. Also, people were still making the shift to turkey, which was slowly replacing other proteins as the top dog. All of this came together to make sure that the crown roasts would stay in the 50s, though people still vibe with the apricot dressing from time to time even now. Œuf en cocotte in the exotic tongue of the French, or as the rest of the world knows it, shirred eggs, were actually one of those egg-based alternatives that I was talking about, though it wasn't really the go-to choice. You're about to find out why, too. See, shirred eggs sound fancy, smell fancy, and they definitely need a chef with fancy skills to really make something out of them. Now, what do we have when we consider the state of home cooking and home chefs in America? Don't get me wrong, there are people here that Gordon Ramsay would probably recruit on the spot. But for every one Michelin star restaurant-level chef, we have 10 home cooks that just want to get a meal in and carry on with their day. Unfortunately, in a climate like that, shirred eggs were always bound to die out. It was a complicated dish that took a lot more work than just scrambling some eggs or making it sunny side up, and it lost public favor almost entirely when canned food, pre-made food, and frozen food started to overtake breakfasts for Americans. Sadly, this little trooper couldn't keep it going in the face of all that and eventually got lost in the history books. Similar to funeral pies, transparent pies also had a tacky name with incredible flavors. The pie emerged in the 1800s around the northern Kentucky region, where people had very few ingredients for a pie due to financial constraints. Still, the cravings were there, and they needed to be filled, especially if you had kids in the households. So people invented the transparent pie, which used the most bare bones of ingredients like flour, eggs, and butter. Fast forward to the 70s, and the case was still very much the same. Summer vacation, hungry kids, and an empty pantry. So what is a 1970s stay-at-home wife baker to do? Simple. Go for a quick and easy transparent pie which could not fail you, even with the limited ingredients, and whipped cream made this a proper treat. People today definitely could not make a pie out of such little ingredients though, so the pie vanished. If we are talking about what was popping the Depression, then it would be criminal to not mention wacky cake. Again, a very dark and vivid cake in terms of flavor that could be frosted with any icing you preferred. The best part about this dish is that you can bake the cake in the same pan in which you make the mix, so it is all a very simple and easy process. An insanely high part of the population wanted comfort food, but everything they would use to make that was so out of reach in those times. Things like wacky cakes, which, despite how they went against traditional baking conventions, provided a lot of warmth and relief to people. If it looks like it and it tastes like, then really, what is the problem? Sadly, most Depression-era cooking stayed in that period. The Hungarians really killed it with dinners that shaped our childhood, because we've got another banger on the list. Hungarian goulash was everyone's favorite cozy hearty meal back in the day. Goulash is a hearty stew whipped up with tender chunks of beef simmered in a rich, savory sauce brimming with paprika. Yeah, paprika was huge back in the day. So why did this delicious dinner vanish from our dinner tables? Well, the Hungarian goulash traces back as far as the 10th century to stews eaten by the shepherds, so you can say this one might just have run its course. But hey, if you're ever craving goulash, Dust off some old cookbooks and get to work because it really isn't hard to wump up. This is the perfect dish for a chilly night in, curled up on the couch with a good movie. Just be careful not to spill it on your mom's vintage tablecloth. Those things are irreplaceable. Cauliflower au gratin pretty much had a run similar to what parsley bisque did, in that it was this heavily creamy and vegetable-oriented dish that got popular thanks to preferences and tastes changing according to the harsh time. It wasn't something you'd ever really picture as a Christmas dinner, especially in most homes. Maybe that one vegan neighbor, sure, but the entire block? That was definitely a fever dream until the 1940s happened and World War II became an active thing people had to wake up and live with. It meant that the practice of rationing became extremely common, especially thanks to government efforts and campaigns. Staples like meat, sugar, and butter, even eggs, were rationed off, and people just didn't have the same access to them anymore. That meant that recipes involving vegetables suddenly saw a massive spike in popularity. I mean, how could it not? What else did the people have left to freely work with on an everyday basis? One of those vegetables was the cauliflower. It was a pretty affordable and economic vegetable that was available to everyone, but also had a lot of variety. Home cooks could work with it easily, and they also took some ideas from local communities and their cuisines, such as the Native Americans, which heavily involved using vegetables on an everyday basis. You just needed milk, flour, and cheese, which were hard ingredients to come by but were saved for special occasions like Christmas to make the bechamel sauce that would work as the base for the au gratin. Then, you would simply top it with whatever cheese you had, or if you couldn't spare any more, a breadcrumb topping, and enjoy the perfectly tender baked cauliflower. It worked amazingly well as this comfort Christmas food that took the edge off from the harsh winters and also filled up everyone's stomachs. It made it perfect to serve alongside roast chicken too, and everybody honestly enjoyed it far more than they ever expected to. Which begs the question, why did they let go of this one? You see, the thing is, processed foods were fast approaching, especially by the 1960s, and these little decade-long flings people have with certain foods are heavily inspired by the kind of situations they find themselves in during those times. Once things settle down and people regain access to all kinds of foods, they're far more likely to go back to old habits rather than adopt new ones. Processed foods played a lot on that and made things that were beloved by everyone even more accessible, and then came things like slow cookers, which really revolutionized how a lot of Americans approached holiday cooking. There wasn't a lot of room left for a cauliflower au gratin to take the stage and dazzle everyone, putting them onto vegetables for the foreseeable future. Here's another evident case of something losing to its betters: caramel rolls. Much like how Dutch baby pancakes lost in the long run to the standard, nostalgic, and ever so timeless regular pancake, caramel rolls could never overtake cinnamon rolls. They were pretty good for what they were, and they even made a pretty decent name for themselves in cafes and bakeries. Caramel rolls had it all initially. They were really nice. They had sweetness, nice packaging, good marketing, all the things you'd need to really get yourself out there in the wider world. Unfortunately, there were a few reasons they just fell a little short of cementing themselves as a staple of American eating and baking that would last well into the 2000s. They were also messy and hard to make, and while the sweetness was a plus point, it also made them really calorically dense and bad for you in the larger picture of things. See, by this point in time, the American masses were glucose veterans. They went through ice cream parlors, soda fountains, the golden age of fast food chains, and so many other things that really racked up the damage they were doing to their bodies just through their diets. As a result, as time kept going on, people started to abandon things like this which were just excessive. Plus, good old cinnamon rolls do the job so much better, and they're not really that bad for you as long as you keep it under control. PB&J sandwiches ran so peanut butter pies could run, and boy did they dash. Around 1975, strangely, a craving took over the masses for peanut butter in all things they were having. Now, pies were never too far off on the horizon, and America was already brainstorming in the kitchen often enough with all kinds of fusion foods and different cuisines. Peanut pie itself was widely eaten in America already, so the stage was completely set for the birth of the peanut butter pie. Hitting bakeries around towns around 1976 and onwards, these double-crust pies filled with very thick and creamy peanut butter were heaven on a platter. Often families would go way overboard with the amount of filling, but who could blame them? Combos with peanut butter would keep continuing in America, and although this one did really well, it would soon get overshadowed. Devil's food cake sounds incredibly intimidating and extra, and we would not blame you for thinking so. Maybe you are picturing a triple-layered behemoth of a cake adorned with skulls and a three-headed dog. What you will actually get if you step in a bakery and ask for, "This is a dark chocolate cake," but not just any old chocolate cake. Devil's foot cakes used to distinguish themselves in many ways from the standard. One of those was that they used much less butter and used more baking soda, giving it that classic mouth-watering look. Also, this helped for a much stronger flavor. Layers of deep, dark chocolate that took an idea as old as men skipping stones on a river to new peaks no one thought it could reach. Just goes to show there may be a lot more treasure if you look a little deeper. No matter how deep we looked, though, we could not find a place that does a great 70s-style devil's foot. Lazy Daisy cakes were made from sponge cakes, particularly hot milk ones, and would always come with a heaping serving of broiled frosting. Sometimes they were called snacking cakes, which tells you all you need to know about the cake. People had a very love-love relationship with Lazy Daisies, and as the name implies, it made them not want to get out of bed. A buttery yellow vanilla cake that was laced with broiled frosting was very hard to beat, and tropical elements like coconut flakes made it all the more refreshing. The frosting could be a vanilla one, but most traditional community cookbook recipes had a coconut and butter topping. Lazy Daisy cakes, true to their name, were easy to whip up in minutes and had you seated in one place for hours, slowly devouring every last slice. It is a crying shame that those are very far away comfort days from now. Scalloped chicken casserole. Here's another classic casserole that deserves a comeback. This dish is the perfect example of simple but mouth-watering good. I mean, just imagine tender chicken pieces in a creamy sauce, seasoned to perfection, and layered with fluffy breadcrumbs. I think I'm feeling hungry now. Scalloped chicken casserole is a great way to use up leftover chicken, and it's perfect for a quick and easy weeknight meal. Not to mention, it's a dish that's sure to please even the pickiest eaters. Who can resist creamy chicken and crispy breadcrumbs? Ditch your takeout menus for a night and take a trip down memory lane by giving this casserole a try. You can find dozens of recipes on the internet, and it won't take you hours to whip up. Trust me, your taste buds will thank you. Parsley and celery root bisque isn't exactly the first thing you think of when you imagine Christmas, but it's still a pretty celebrated dish in the United States, especially if you go all the way back to the 1920s. Now, this kind of reflects the culture that was popular back then, which basically made use of anything it could scavenge, forage, save, or mix with vegetables so that it would last longer. That wasn't just a thing for the average income households, but even the wealthier ones, because the times were simply that chaotic. In the 1920s, Christmas dinner menus would switch up depending on the state you went to. And I mean, you could get French exotics on one end of the spectrum and eat lamb brain on the other. It was a wild ride, and parsley and celery root bisque found a humble place for themselves in between all of that. Soups and bisques were first just used as an appetizer, something to get you started on the main course, but they became a main dish thanks to the efforts of a lot of French chefs. They're the ones that first introduced the idea of creamy bisque during the very start of the 20th century, and parsley and celery root was just one example of that. It gave a nice earthy base to the soup, and it worked really well with cream and sherry wine. As you're already well aware, there's no one on the planet that knows how to mix wine with food better than the French. It fit the sensation of Christmas, as it was seen as sophisticated, so it made you feel all special when you'd get a bowl, but it was also seen as festive. It was basically the perfect kind of soup to serve since it made sense with the occasion and the season. Plus, food trends in the 1920s were moving more and more towards sophisticated dishes and gourmet dining. So there was a wave of middle-class homes mimicking recipes and techniques used by chefs in fine dining restaurants. In the more affluent neighborhoods, it would be common to include things like roasted chicken, turkey, or oysters too. The thing is, though, America had its fill of soups pretty quickly, and each decade in the 20th century moved a bit more towards fast food than the last one did. Competition from the citrus side of things is unexpected when you think about cranberry orange muffins beating out the largest pancakes you've ever seen, but anything's known to happen during lunch in America. The thing with those was that they didn't really give us too much over what we already had, but this is a stellar example of how to do exactly that just right. It was a staple in cafes, homes, and even bakeries, and really, it dying out is no fault of its own. Sometimes it's just a sign of the times and changing trends that knocks these winners off of their thrones and leaves them in the dust. Does that mean this is a recipe that isn't worth your time? Not at all, especially if it got its rep during the 70s, where good and new food was definitely not in short supply. You don't even have to worry about the seasonal thing anymore since you can just get oranges throughout the year now. It's probably still got some die-hard fans in a few areas here and there, but cranberry and orange as a combination lost steam throughout the later half of the 20th century. Hawaii has always brought a peculiar taste to any local dish, and chocolate hopia pie is no different. A chocolate pie with a coconut cream frosting topped with whipped cream, giving it a really pretty, milky white appearance. Taste-wise, you had strong waves of chocolate mixed in with perfect little kicks of coconut. Lots of rich whipped cream added the consistency the dish was otherwise missing, and it left the pie with few flaws to speak of. People definitely thought so back then, at least. You could find this in states literally the opposite side of Hawaii, like Ohio and Texas. In chocolate hopia pie, you had something that did not completely disregard standard American tastes, but added a refreshing little something to make it more exciting. Presently, even in Hawaii, this is a rarely made pie as it went out of style. Here's one that has a bit of a controversy on it depending on where you are from. The Italian cream cake did really well in the South. Pretty much every neighborhood had it up for dinner at Thanksgiving or some kind of holiday. Maybe their kid just passed an entrance test, or maybe they got a lease on that house they have been planning to move into. Point being, any reason was mostly a good reason to have an Italian cream cake. Outside the South, people sort of questioned the cream cheese frosting and had their reservations. Critics could not see how almonds and pecans could work together in a dish with coconuts as a base, especially with a frosting like that, but it was definitely still a presence in the baking scene in 1970s America. Back then, it had a niche following, and enough time has passed for that to have faded away long ago, so no one really remembers a legit Italian cream cake now. Hear me out, this one might sound a little boring at first glance, but trust me, it's a classic for a reason. The split pea soup is a hearty, filling, and surprisingly healthy-ish, thick, creamy soup packed with vibrant green split peas and other vegetables like carrots, celery, and onions. Now, on that healthy-ish claim, it depends on how much butter and cream your grandma used. The split pea soup is the kind of soup that leaves you feeling satisfied for hours. It has been a St. Patrick's Day staple ever since its origin in 1905. The best part? You can totally customize it according to your liking. Yeah, don't be shy to throw in your favorite veggies, add a splash of lemon juice for a bit of brightness, or even some leftover shredded chicken for an extra protein punch. We really need to bring this one back. So, the thing with traditional roast goose is that it's probably one of the most ancient Christmas dinners we have, and that's not just limited to the United States of America, but honestly, it applies the most to us. The goose was always associated with pagan winter traditions in some areas, with geese being such active habitat-hopping birds, but it was most popular to hunt them during the winter season. If you caught them even earlier, say, during the fall, then you'd spend the months fattening them so that they'd make for a good feast. Goose fat was really popular too for its health benefits. In general, the use of geese in particular was always linked with a good time, peace, and full stomachs all around. Unfortunately, it was somewhere along the 19th and 20th centuries that roast turkey's dominance began to fade away. It found itself losing badly to turkey, which was already a thing in America since the 16th century, but never gained this kind of mainstream power. There was good reason for people to make the switch too, since preparing a turkey and farming one was significantly easier than catching geese every winter. Also, they weren't even half as fatty, and the general perspective on immensely fatty game has changed a lot since the 19th century. Now, people kind of detest the idea. Plus, by the 1910s, everyone was way too used to seeing geese for every feast. Turkey became not only the practical choice, but also the new status symbol. It was the new girl in town, and everyone wants to get with the new girl. Or bird, in this case. Plus, it wasn't just a switch in tastes and health preferences, it was even in the entertainment. Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol around 1843, and it featured a goose as the main dinner, but in later adaptations it got replaced with turkey too. There are still some niche fans of the stuff around, but thanks to a lot of modern food being based around getting takeout, ordering in, or just using pre-made and frozen food to get the job done, the concept of an entire roasted goose just isn't something people want on their tables anymore. So eggs in a hole, on the other hand, were a classic that was seen exactly as a dish for at least middle-class homes and people who knew their way around a kitchen. A bit of presentation and flair, and it's a wonder what people will start seeing you as. I guess glow-ups and appearances matter even for food, don't they? Looks-wise, this was an appetizing little dish thanks to the egg cooked inside the cutout piece of bread. It gave it a real air of, yeah, this is fancy to it, which was nice at the time, although something like this would still be seen as just okay now. Despite the cover, this book's actually pretty simple, which was also its downfall. Sometimes you need a bit of complexity to give you an edge over the competition, and sometimes sticking to the simple roots, the tried and tested methods and flavors, is exactly what a dish needs to remain top dog. Both sides of the spectrum have cases of recipes that took the memo a little too strongly to heart and ended up paying for it. Eggs in a hole were considered too simple as tastes leaned more and more towards what we have now, in modern America. And it fell out of favor with the people when trendier and more visually appealing breakfasts started popping out. Things like smoothie bowls, rice bowls, avocado toast, and the like. Pecans and pies really became a fashionable mix when sawdust pie started moving into bakeries everywhere. Your typical dark forest chocolate cakes and lemon meringues were pushed to the side for a while, especially in the South. Crowds were going crazy for dried fruit pies, especially in the seasons of summer or autumn. Something about falling orange leaves and pecan pies just made so much sense that it was a vibe for that time of the year. Unlike Jefferson pies, which had a whole crew of dried fruits inside, sawdust pies were more focused. Graham crackers and some pecans made for one delicious pie, plus some states like Hawaii like to add coconuts too. Not the most popular of pies on this list, but definitely a top comfort food, at least some odd 50 years ago in the 70s. Do not get the wrong idea, because Americans have no real problem with cream cheese frosting, and cakes like hummingbird cakes prove that. Hummingbird cakes were a deeply beloved 3-layered cake with a very smooth and buttery cream cheese frosting. Bananas, pineapples, pecans, and brown sugar were also used, but contained in different layers. Due to the way it was structured, with each section having a unique taste, the cake sold heaps. If you ever have had one, by the way, remember to thank Jamaica for doing the US a favor and giving us the recipe. They actually did it to promote tourism to Jamaica, so we guess it is a win-win situation. Despite having peaked in the 70s and being largely gone by the 90s, it was still known as the most wanted recipe in Southern Living's recipe in 1990. If you do not know, that magazine was and is a pretty big deal for chefs. Back in the 1950s, the Divan Parisian restaurant at Chatham Hotel in New York City gave birth to its signature dish, the chicken divan casserole. This mouth-watering dish soon found its way to all our homes, and I'm not complaining. It's made of tender chicken pieces nestled amongst vibrant green broccoli florets in a rich and creamy sauce, topped with a generous layer of melty cheese and a sprinkle of crispy breadcrumbs. The chef who leaked this recipe out to the public really took one for the team, and we can never thank him enough. It's the perfect combination of protein, veggies, and all the cheesy goodness your heart desires. Just maybe pair it with a side salad to pretend you're being healthy. Chicken divan casserole is the retro dish of every cheese lover's dreams, and you know what that calls for? A comeback. It's a classic at throwback parties, but you don't really need an excuse to cook this up. A typical Tuesday night works too. For something called the does not disappoint breakfast casserole, this couldn't live up to its name. It was made out of eggs, sausage, cheese, hash browns, and even bread. And yes, for those of you who are calorically observant, that is a dump truck of carbs. It also takes a lot of time to make. It can take an hour or more to get going, and if you get greedy and pop it out early, you just won't have a good-tasting breakfast. Also, this might seem odd to you, but Planned Parenthood is another thing. See, the trend these days is smaller and smaller families or married couples even putting off kids in favor of building a career together and getting their credit up. Back in the 20th century, it was the complete opposite. People had families of 4, 5, and even 6, and that goes for people living in uptown cities too. That was the norm, Get married, have kids. As a result, most of the food you'll see from that era is extremely crowd-oriented. It's meant to feed several people, and that's why it takes a long while to make too. And that just doesn't fit the breakfast needs of the modern American, who's pretty much used to grabbing deli wraps on the way to their 9-hour shift. If even one of these lost Christmas flavors warmed your memory, drop it in the comments and hit like and subscribe to keep the holiday spirit cooking.